So just picking right back up where we left off, we talked about in the previous lecture about the ages and grades, about when people are saying that they're having different kind of forms of romantic relationships, whether it is, liking somebody, having a sustained relationship, all the way up to having a planned engagement or marriage. And we see very few adolescents reporting that. And we're seeing that, of course, in the United States, that pattern starting to change and shift into much older, even past through to past emerging adulthood. Now, when we talk a little bit more about, let's talk a little bit more about romantic relationships. So, of course, romantic relationships can really take over an adolescent, emerging adult's lives because there's a lot of pressure, a lot of times from family, and from what is the expectation for your age group to be in a relationship. Sometimes when when we look at these romantic emotions and we say, what are these relationships kind of doing in terms of having an effect on adolescents or emerging adulthood? Of course, emerging adults, of course, some of this is positive and some of this is negative, right? So when we look at a breakup, for example, a breakup is going to be a potentially very negative thing because it can result in a person experiencing depression. It can sort of stop them, halt them in their life, and they might be spending a lot of time ruminating or thinking about this thing over and over again. So it can be a negative thing when it comes to especially like breakups. So when we talk about, what's happening, generally speaking, in emotions, of course, adolescents do spend a lot of time thinking about romantic involvement. Romantic relationships are often involved in a lot of adolescents' emotional experiences. And those adolescents who have a boyfriend or girlfriend tend to report a wider array of daily emotional swings than their counterparts who do not have boyfriends or girlfriends. And one thing that I do want you guys to do, this is the end of kind of a segment, and there is a video posted where you'll see it talks about like an adolescent's brain in love and the brain in love. And I really want you guys to watch that. It's a lot of fun to listen to how the brain processes love. So I really encourage you guys to watch that, and you need to watch it for the forum. So make sure you give that a look. Also, I think this is really funny. I had to include this Twilight picture because everyone says anything is a better love story than Twilight, but a lot of people can relate to this particular movie and book series. So, and I think this is an example too of like the media's kind of take on, a teenager in love is just so it's like wild and uncontrollable, and these emotions are, and it's things like this, like these Twilight type of books and movies, they tend to really exaggerate the adolescent in love, right? So this can be harmful because then you as a teenager are like, well, I guess that's how I'm supposed to act, right? Even though you might not be a werewolf or a wolf or a vampire, but you still have emotions, right? So when it comes to dating and adjustment, researchers have linked dating and romantic relationships to things like how well adjusted an adolescent is. And so a lot of studies have been kind of looking at romantic experiences. And there was one particular study that looked at 10th graders. And what they found is that the more romantic experiences the adolescent had, they reported higher levels of social acceptance, friendship competence, and romantic competence. Those who had more romantic experiences reported higher levels of substance abuse, delinquency, and sexual behavior. So we're seeing some positives, right? They're more accepted in their friend groups. They tend to have more romantic competence because they have more experience, because they have more practice. But they're also more likely to do things like do at-risk, risky behaviors, sexual behaviors. And we know that dating in romantic relationships at an early age can be especially problematic, right? And so that can be something that, having a nice supervised transition into romantic relationships is an important aspect of this, right? So, when it comes to romantic breakups, right? a lot of the studies have really focused on the negative aspects, right? So, oh, what are the bad things about romantic breakups? You go into a depression and you're really sad. But there are some positives that come from breakups, right? So they can lead to positive changes. So there's a particular study that wasn't done too long ago about college students, and they found that self-reported positive growth was really common following romantic breakups. And so, that's something where you are kind of learning what you don't like or what you do like, or realizing that things aren't going to work out because you really want them to. It's work that you have to go towards a relationship. So this can actually lead into really good growth as long as you're able to see the positives from it. Now let's look at romantic versus affectionate love. So romantic love, this is what we call a passionate love, right? So this is having that strong sexual and infatuation components. We often see this predating or predominating the early part of a relationship, of a love relationship. So it's like that passion, right? It's also referred to as eros. So that passion, that passionate love, sexual components, infatuation components, this is that, first part where you just can't be away from the person, right? This is going to characterize a lot of adolescent love, this kind of infatuation component. It's important among college students too, to engage in this. It's the exciting, first part where you can't be away from each other. But now there's another type of love. So that's romantic love, passionate love, affectionate love. So affectionate love, this is also called companionate love. So think of it like a companion. This is when an individual wants to have the person near them, not in a sexual way necessarily. It's just they want to spend time with them. They have a deep and caring affection for that person. And there's a strong belief that affectionate love is more characteristic of adult love than adolescent love. So this is something that, comes into, so it might start out with romantic love and then move into affectionate love. So it doesn't have to be physical all the time. You just want to be in the same room with the person. You just want to spend time with them because you care for them deeply, right? When it comes to physical attractiveness and similarity are important aspects of romantic relationships, right? And so if you look at some of the research, there can be pretty substantial pre-relationship similarities between adolescents and their future romantic partners on things like peer popularity, attractiveness, body appeal, even depressive symptoms. So being similar can certainly help. And we have this kind of idea that opposites attract, right? Well, it turns out that that's really that is true in a way, but mostly for rebound relationships. And a lot of times they don't necessarily work out. What you want to be is you want to be compatible with the person, right? So if they have a particular weakness and you have a strength in an area, you can you sort of balance each other out. So it's not necessarily opposites. It's sort of being able to balance each other out. Now another thing that's something that we can have talked about and can talk about too is this idea of attachment, right? So we talked about attachment in parents and caregivers. We know that adolescents with a secure attachment to parents are more likely to approach romantic relationships expecting closeness, warmth, and intimacy, which is what they have gotten from their parents, right? As young children. And so they tend to feel more comfortable developing close, intimate, romantic relationships. But just because a person might not have that experience with a secure attachment doesn't necessarily mean they're never going to find a healthy relationship, right? When we look at parents' marital relationships, right? So that is going to impact and contribute to the adolescents' romantic relationships because they're observing how the parents are acting in their relationship and whether they're actually married or not, but they have parents who are together, right? That's going to help shape how they're going to construct their own dating relationship. Parents are likely to be more involved or interested in, for example, their daughter's dating patterns and relationships over their son. So we're seeing gender differences there, and we also see that peer relationships and friendships, just like the parents' marital relationships, can be a way to model relationships. So peers can learn from other peers. And also what we learn during these kind of early adolescence and through adolescence can help carry over in terms of friendship, can help carry over into those romantic relationships. So there's a lot of factors that are involved that can help a peer understand how to develop a healthy relationship. Now, when we look at gender and culture and dating, okay, we do see that male and female adolescents do bring different motivations to the dating experience. Girls are more likely to describe romance in terms of interpersonal qualities, whereas boys are going to describe it more of physical attraction. But again, is this because we've been socializing them to do this, or is this something that's ingrained? And there's also a lot of there is a lot of evidence that says that some of this might be coming from the evolutionary psychology perspective, might be sort of ingrained in us. And so that's kind of those interpersonal qualities. So girls tend to be describe it more interpersonal, whereas boys tend to be more physical attractions. Now, dating scripts, something that we had actually talked about previously, and I actually had you guys do this in a class before. What would a dating script look like, right? So a script, this is this kind of guide or model, this thing that we say all the time. This is the way that we kind of say things. If I say, hey, how are you? That's a script. Your part of the script is, I'm fine, how are you, right? So dating scripts also follow a particular series. And so these are these cognitive models that we use to guide and evaluate dating interactions. And so if you say, for example, if you send a text that says, hey, what are you doing? Or if you're trying to communicate with a boyfriend or girlfriend, you're going to do that in a particular way that's expected for you to do it. And, we can even go even earlier to early adolescence, when you might send somebody write on a note, right? Do you like me? Yes or no? Do you want to be my boyfriend? Yes or no? And that is something. That's a script, right? That's something that we've learned to develop and follow. And these scripts change, of course, as we change as a society. So, it can be more direct. For example, girls tend to not be as direct as boys, but that might be something that is changes from generation to generation. In some studies, for example, there was first dates are really highly scripted along gender lines. So the first date, boys tend to follow a proactive dating script. So they're kind of taking the lead and they're more sort of forward, whereas girls tend to follow a reactive script. So they're kind of letting the boy lead and then they kind of react to that. Now, as we see, of course, changes in society where girls are allowed to be more forward, the script may change. And so it's the adolescent's job to understand what the script is and then how to follow it. Now, of course, we do see differences in different religions, and we see differences in ethnicities and cultures. And so when it comes to religious beliefs, that is going to a lot of times dictate what the pattern is going to look like, what the script is going to look like. And another thing too, and something that I kind of skipped over, is the sociocultural context, right? So not just, so this can be anything. This can be socioeconomic status. This can be values. This can be religious beliefs. This can be their status. That's going to be a really powerful influence on their dating patterns as well as mate selection. So, if race is a factor, if ethnicity and culture is a factor, if you are a particular religion and it's expected that you only date within your religion, that is going to dictate who you are going to date, or at least try to date or choose to date, right? And so there's a lot of factors here in that can dictate things like the age at which dating begins. So how early are people allowed to date, and is it going to be different from boys versus girls? How much freedom in dating is allowed? There are some cultures that you're not allowed to hold hands, you're not allowed to kiss, you're not allowed to touch while you're dating. And in whatever culture that you live in is going to dictate those rules. It also is the extent to which dates are chaperoned by parents and other adults. So you may not ever be alone with the partner that you're dating, right? Or it might be very, very free. It might be like, okay, well, have fun. See you guys, at 11 p.m. at curfew. Looking at the respective roles of male versus female, like what is the boy doing? What is the girl doing? These are things that are going to be dictated a lot of times by values, religious beliefs, and cultures, because that is what the expectation is for those adolescents. When we look at Arab, Asian countries, South American countries, we're seeing highly restricted rules placed on girls, right? Romantic relationships as compared to boys. And we also see that those immigrants who are in the United States, right, they bring these restrictive standards with them because it's part of their culture. And so you might find that there are certain groups of people, groups of adolescents who are following different scripts, different rules, different expectations because of the culture or the religion or the value that they're following based on potentially where their parents are from, or if they are may or may not be citizens, just depending on where they're from. So these are all things that you have to consider, especially when studying it. You want to be able to study, okay, what does it look like when people are in a particular country, and then what does it look like when they immigrate to other countries? And what you do find is that they do bring a lot of restrictive standards, but a lot of times they get modified, right? So if an adolescent is, for example, a part of an Asian country, and their parents are following what the standard is for their culture and from their country, then they're trying to also be a part of an American culture as well. And so this can sometimes be a point of contention when the adolescent is like, I know that you have these high standards or different standards, but I'm also an American, or I'm also living in America, and I'm trying to, depending if they're, how they associate with the culture, I need to also be, let's be less restrictive. And there are a lot of times compromises that have to be made because, the child's trying to assimilate into the culture properly. Now, when we move on to emerging adulthood, right? So this is when we find changes taking place in romantic relationships. We're seeing things like residential changes, lifestyle changes. And so these are really important to consider when you are moving out of adolescence, right? And so there is a decreased stigma attached to those who are not doing sort of the conventional family, right? So if you aren't getting married at this particular age, if you are not having children by this particular age, what we're finding is that there's less stigma associated with that, right? There's less stigma associated with having a husband and a wife, and they have to be married. They have to be married before having kids, and they have to have 2.5 kids, right? This is we're moving away from this as an American culture. And what that's doing is it's less stress and pressure on adolescents and then emerging adults to follow a particular path. We find that emerging adults today, they're choosing a lot of different kinds of lifestyles. They're choosing a lot of different types of families. So we're having people today, more so than ever, single people just adopting kids, or having children, and raising those children without intention of having a partner, because that's what they want to do with their life. Or they, move in with another family, and then they have, kind of multiple families living in the same household. There's a lot of different lifestyles out there that, and they work for them, right? There are some people who have multiple partners, or they have open relationships or open marriages. These are things that, if everybody's a consenting adult, then, and it's working for everybody, then, that's, and a lot of times it works for certain people. And in the United States, we see more marriages and remarriages, more divorces, more short-term cohabiting relationships than most other countries. And we're going to talk again about that. I think I have a graph on that in just a few minutes, a little bit about that. Okay. So when we look at single adults, right? And so if we look at, the patterns in recent decades, we see a dramatic rise in the percentage of single adults. And for the first time in history, the proportion of adults who are 25 to 34 years of age who have never been married before, they're actually exceeding those who were married. So it's 46%. That's the proportion of individuals who are 25 to 34 years of age who have never been married. That's actually more than those who are married, which is 45%. So, and this statistic might even be even higher now. This statistic might be a couple of years old. But even when single adults enjoy their lifestyle and are highly competent, they are often stereotyped. And so stereotypes could be they're swinging single, they're desperately lonely, suicidal, they are, oh, that's a cat person. There's a lot of stigma and stereotypes still, especially in older generations. It's getting better, but there's definitely stereotypes, and many of you may even have experienced this yourself and saying, I keep getting asked, my grandmother keeps asking me, when am I going to get married? And that's something that is going to eventually get better as we move forward as a society, right? There are issues that single adults may have. For example, they might experience issues with forming intimate relationships with other adults. They might be dealing a lot with loneliness. They might have issues with finding a sort of a niche in society that is that's for single adults. You think there's a lot of marriage oriented laws and rules and in a lot of cases perks. And if a person is single, they may have issues with, things like even just doing taxes and getting tax breaks and things like that. There's a lot of things in our country that's really designed for a married couple. And so that can be really, really hard when you're living in a sort of marriage-oriented society, trying to find your way through that society. However, even though there's some problems, there's definitely a lot of advantages. You have time to make any decision that you want about your own life course. You don't have to consult with another person. You decide what you want. You have time to develop your personal resources, to meet your goals, find your career. You can save your money or spend all your money. It's totally up to you. You have the freedom to make autonomous decisions about anything in your life, and you can pursue your own schedule and interests. You have opportunities to explore new places, try out new things without having to, collaborate with other people or with yourself. And you also have a lot of privacy. And I can say that is definitely something that you value as a single person, that if you ever do go into a relationship, you say, wow, I kind of miss that in some cases. When you have a cohabiting adults, so these are adults who live together in a sexual relationship, but they're not married. Okay. We have seen a lot of a big increase in the number of couples who are living together but not married since 1970, and we see that a number of those couples who are living together, they don't necessarily view this as like, oh, we're going to get married as a precursor to marriage. This is just who we are, or this is just an ongoing lifestyle, right? They tend to be short-lived, especially when you go into this saying, oh, we're probably never going to get married. We're just going to, see how it goes. They tend to be more short-lived. About a third of them last less than a year. So that's a statistic that, of course, can vary depending on how the culture is moving forward with acceptance of of living together. Now, people who cohabitate, they can face certain problems, okay? And so, for example, they might have disapproval by parents, especially, or grandparents, especially if there is a particular religious expectation that you can't live together before you're married. It's difficult to own property jointly when you're not married because of and as well as other issues, just because of the way that the laws are. You have less legal rights. For example, if you are in a situation where your partner passes away, you may not be able to have any rights to any of their belongings. You may, especially if you don't have, especially if you haven't been together very long, this can certainly be problematic. And there's also an elevated risk of partner violence as well. Now, when it comes to the comparison of cohabitation versus marital stability and happiness, so what they found is that the majority of studies have found lower rates of marital satisfaction and higher rates of divorce in those who live together before getting married. So lower rates of marital satisfaction and higher rates of divorce in those who live together before getting married. And this less traditional lifestyle may attract less conventional individuals who are not great believers in marriage. So that can actually factor into why the marriage didn't work. And so if you live together for many years and then finally decided to get married, but maybe you don't really you have a lot of stock in marriage, that is probably the underlying factor. It's not the fact that you were living together. It's the fact that you don't really place a high value in marriage anyway. So even if you hadn't been living together very long, that marriage probably wouldn't have lasted. So those are factors that you have to think about. And the experience of living together can change people's attitudes and habits in ways that's going to increase their likelihood of divorce. So when you look at sort of more of the recent work, there seems to be, so some of this feels kind of contradictory, but when you look at underlying factors, remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. So just because people are living together a long time, then they get married, and then they get divorced, doesn't mean it was the living together that was the problem. So a recent analysis found that it doesn't really have a negative effect on marriage if the couple did not have any previous live-in lovers and they didn't have children prior to marriage. So there's some factors in there that really contribute to the happiness and success as a couple. Now, looking here, this was the graph that I was referring to earlier. So this is the number of people who are living together who are unmarried, and these are in the millions, right? So in 1960, that's a really low number, and then you start to see a pretty drastic increase in the 2000s with, I don't know, about 3.7 million people living together, and then here in 2010, that number has shot up pretty significantly. And here we're seeing also a culture shift in the expectation that you don't necessarily have to be married to live together. And so that these are definitely factors in the likelihood of people cohabitating together. Okay, so I'm going to end here. I'm going to pick right back up, and we're going to talk about marriage, and we're going to talk about divorce. We've talked about this a little bit previously, but I want to touch on this again.